blockchain and see how the technology is on its way towards maturity, and how various organizations, whether they are startups or big companies, are moving ahead with this technology. So in this panel, I want to talk about something very interesting. It's a paradigm shift that is being forced upon by blockchain on the entire ecosystem, specifically in the banking and financial services space, but extending to other areas as well. And that is, we are seeing former competitors who have had long histories of competing with each other, sometimes quite heavily in the market, collaborating with each other because they are realizing that with blockchain technology, collaboration actually brings in greater benefits than just simple old-fashioned competition. Right? We see this starting with the financial services, and we have some very good speakers here who can talk about it, but also moving on to the startup ecosystem, government, and others. So I have some key leaders from the banking and tech industry and startups to discuss this evolution and what it means for this entire financial services ecosystem. So I would request them to introduce themselves and maybe spend a couple of seconds talking about their connection to this topic and how they are fostering collaboration in this ecosystem. So I'll start with Mr. Hitesh, Sachdev, go to Josh, Ravi, and Tarusha in that order. Hitesh, over to you. Hitesh, are you able to hear us? I think let's give Hitesh some time. I think his screen is frozen. But Josh, maybe you can introduce yourself beyond the title and talk about very briefly about what you're doing.
Sure. Thanks, Vivek, and very happy to be here today speaking with this audience. So I'm the Chief Product Officer of Contour, and Contour is a global company looking at bringing together the world's banks and trading corporates onto a common decentralized network. So I've spent most of my life in the banking and the trade finance space. And I'm really excited to talk about this topic because blockchain is really a godsend for us. It's led to a lot of innovation and a lot of progress in the space of digitization of trade finance, and it's allowed for, as you mentioned, collaboration where in the past there wasn't as much, which we think has made really significant leaps forward in this area.
Sure. Thanks, Ravi.
Hi everyone. So I'm a co-founder and chief product officer at Blockster Lab. We are doing something very interesting in the digital identity space. What we are creating is a platform where user would have their sovereign identity in order to carry their identity credentials across different devices. And what we are, what I would be interested to share about is the collaboration that we are seeing across different layers, and specifically from business and technology perspective. How are these two areas being covered from a collaboration across different participants of the ecosystem?
Sure. Thanks, Ravi. Tarusha?
So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. I'm Tarusha. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Oropocket. Oropocket essentially provides financial services on blockchain. So we give a platform where the end user is able to invest in certain asset classes, and then on top of these asset classes, we provide financial services, which kind of make these investments highly liquid. The reason why I agree to be on this panel and why this is such an exciting topic is because I truly believe that banks and blockchain, or so to say, the traditional finance and the decentralized space, they need to work together to grow the ecosystem forward. And there's no way that one is going to go forward without the other. So yeah.
Thank you, Tarusha. Hitesh, if you're able to.
Am I audible now, Vivek?
Yes, you are.
Hey, thanks, Vivek, and apologies for that technical glitch. I am Hitesh Sachdev. I manage startup engagement and investments at ICICI Bank. We work with startup ecosystem and collaborate with startups to co-create products with them and launch those products in ICICI Bank ecosystem. Apart from that, we also invest into fintech startups. my association with blockchain and DLT framework goes back to early days when, as a bank, we had done some experiments, bilateral pilots and experiments on blockchain, and then we kind of created a consortium of Indian banks, which I will talk further, as we progress on the panel discussions. But it's a one of its kind of unique consortium of Indian banks which have come together to co-create and collaborate and work together and in harnessing the potential of the DLT and blockchain.
Sure. Thank you. So I think great panelists, and all of them have very, very relevant insights into this topic. So I'll start off with the big guys, the big banks in the room first. And let me start by setting the context with Josh and Hitesh. Right, both of you have been at the center of setting up one of the probably the largest collaborative initiatives in the banking ecosystem, banking and financial services ecosystem, whether it's with Contour or whether it's with the IBBIC consortium in India. So can you talk about to us about the process, both the opportunity and the challenges, and why, more importantly, why that was necessary because of blockchain? Like, what catalyst role did blockchain play in that process?
Sure. So maybe I'll go first, if that's okay. So I guess I spent most of my career in a large global bank, HSBC, with an impossible job, which was to digitize trade finance. But a single bank trying to digitize trade finance with their client base really is impossible because of the nature of international trade. Even a single transaction will, of course, have a buyer, a seller. They each have their own banking relationships, and that's just the financial leg of it. Then you have ports and customs and the whole physical side of trade as well. So it's not something that any one party in that ecosystem can drive themselves. Trade needs global standards, and it needs that collaborative element. So the only choice, back then before blockchain was to build something yourself and then try to sell it to others, or to buy from a third-party centralized solution. And of course, third-party centralized solutions, banks were quite nervous about. They were quite defensive because, do you really want all of the world's trade data, sitting in the hands of one party? A lot of regulators wouldn't allow that, just to begin with. So DLT and specifically, Corda really allowed banks to, speak with the other, not just global banks, but also local and regional banks, and come together and form a common network, common infrastructure to really ease all of these processes that are involved in trade and trade finance, and to build workflows, move away from just sending messages in courier bags full of paper. And that has a lot of efficiency benefits, but it goes beyond that. It's also just about improving accessibility of trade finance, around the world, and increasing the amount of global trade around the world as well. So it was something that could only ever come from collaboration. And DLT and blockchain like Corda has really allowed us to really achieve that goal, and to do it in a meaningful way with, everyone owning their own data, but being on a common network, having that synchronization that, what I see is what you see. That has allowed for so many business benefits. And, we've been obviously riding that wave and are now in production and are starting to, get clients across the world, including in India, starting to reap those benefits.
Great. I have a couple of follow-up questions, but I'll let Hitesh speak, and then I think those would be common questions for him as well. Please, Hitesh, go ahead.
Sure. So I think, as Joshua mentioned, I think we also did some individual, bilateral experiments. However, we soon realized that to harness the potential of DLT framework, we need more stakeholders. And with that thought in mind, we started evangelizing this idea with like-minded banks. And initially, though, people were not convinced, and everybody was at a different level in terms of the knowledge, or also in terms of the confidence on the blockchain as a technology, right? many times people came back and said that, blockchain is a technology which is still finding a problem which it can solve, right? So there were a lot of myths, most of the time it was also uh, construed as more of crypto thing. So there were a lot of myths around it also. It took some time to evangelize this idea with the like-minded, folks at, various banks. And with that effort, we could at least, try to convince people that, hey, look, instead of doing individual experiments, let's all come together and try to solve some common problems, right? And that's where this competition to collaboration angle kicked in, wherein, there are some areas where we can still compete, but there are definitely areas where all of us with common objectives can come together, collaborate, and set industry standards, and which is, efficient and good for all the stakeholders. So it was also a challenge in terms of selecting the right use case, right? We had different banks coming out with different use cases in mind, and ultimately we had to zero down on trade finance. As Joshua mentioned, I think trade finance is the most cumbersome, paper intensive, prone to frauds. There are a lot of inefficiencies, and and a lot of turnaround time issues also. If you see today, the open the open trade transactions, which used to be 84% of the total trade transactions in, let's say, 2012-13, in 2000, by 2018, this jumped up to 88%, right? I mean, so more and more people were doing open trade transactions and not doing and routing the transaction through bank and not using any bank instruments. So again, it is imperative for banks to figure out that what the customers want, right? And one need to innovate and figure out right set of products for the needs of the customers. And that's where again the DLT framework, which we have envisaged, will bring down a lot of turnaround time, the cost of the trade. So it will only help banks to garner more and more volumes and at least retain the customers who are actually moving away from from the banks or the financial institutions for doing trade transactions. So my sense is that this is, I mean, there in terms of putting it together, I mean, we it was a long journey. There were challenges, but after people understood the advantages, I think it was much easier. And there are, I think, two principles which we laid down when we are forming this consortium. One principle was of equality, that all the members are equal, right? Nobody is kind of overpowering the other members. And the second principle was of transparency, that we will be transparent across all the members in terms of whatever we do, whether we select a right DLT partner, whether we select a cloud partner, whether we select the team, product design, use cases, common rule book. Everything was, I think, hovering around only these two principles of transparency and equality, I think, which also created a lot of trust among the members, and which helped us to move forward. And we are at a stage now we are incorporating that as a separate entity. Yeah. So I mean, these are my initial thoughts, and kind of I will be happy to kind of answer more questions, Vivek.
Sure. Thanks, Hitesh. That was very insightful. So I think I picked up some common themes that came out when both of you were talking. One was, of course, today both of you stand on the cusp of success, but the word challenges was thrown out a couple of times during both your insights. And the second thing was around trust. So I think, let me put the question this way. Let me focus on the challenge issue first as a follow-on. If you were to highlight maybe the key challenge that you faced, was it around technology? Was it around people? Was it around just organizational inertia? What was it in the journey from competition to collaboration? What was the biggest challenge?
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting question. I think the destination is quite clear. I think we all know what we want trade finance to be in the future in terms of very digital, very streamlined, protected against frauds, et cetera. But the path to get there is not so clear. And I think this is where you can get pulled in a lot of different directions. I think Hitesh was talking about, different banks wanted different use cases, et cetera. And that's very common. So, the key is in collaboration is finding those common points and then sticking to it and not getting distracted by chasing too many things and staying at a high level. This is something that I think we've done quite well, and it's something that we've learned. It's not something that we just knew inherently. But if you wanted to focus on global trade, you have to find that common ground. You can't invent something that one person might think is a good idea and expect the world to adopt it. You have to sort of move at the pace of the industry. So that's why we started focusing on letters of credit, one of the most traditional payment methods in international trade. The future of global trade is not letters of credit, but it is the best standard that we have today, and it is a common pain point worth solving for the widest number of participants in the world of global trade. And that, I think, will lead to this path of adoption at scale, which then you can use to experiment, to innovate, and to really continually improve the level of digitization as we go. So I think it's that path. Getting that path and having that buy-in is the biggest challenge, rather than chasing too many different use cases at an early stage and not going deep enough where it can scale at the global scale it needs to.
Interesting. Hitesh, anything else to add?
Yeah. I would concur with Joseph, and to add, I think two, three things, which were kind of hindrance or, impediments, where one is the entire knowledge quotient in terms of, the blockchain and how does it work, and a lot of myths around it, right? So it was a first step to kind of bring people on at par in terms of, what it is all about. And having done that, I think second part was to also lay down some commercial benefits, right? Because this is something which you are experimenting new, and you are asking people to commit resources and time. Though it is an experiment, but still people expect that, what is that commercial outcome at the end of it, after let's say spending a few months or on it, and what is it for us to kind of benefit from. So one and then obviously use cases and other challenges. But I think these two things came out in the very early days, where we were trying to onboard a lot of banks, and these were the two questions which had we had to convince people many times on these two questions, right? So but I think it was also a process in terms of when initially few people came on board. I think it generated confidence on the for the other stakeholders, and then kind of
I think we have lost audio for Hitesh.
follow. Am I audible? Hello, am I audible?
Sorry, Hitesh. I think we lost the audio for last 10 seconds.
No. So I said, two challenges. I think one was on the knowledge quotient side, and the other was on the commercial benefits, right? Anybody who wants to kind of put their resources, time, and energy on it, people wanted to be clear on those two things, I think, and kind of we kind of had good time we spent on bringing knowledge quotient up, and then we also laid down a lot of commercial benefits in terms of what it will entail to each of the stakeholders and outcomes, right? I mean, probable outcomes, right? So yeah.
Great. So thanks. So I can continue on this whole day, because I have been very closely associated with both of these initiatives. But I think we are keeping Ravi and Tarusha waiting, our vanguards from the startup side. So I think for startups, it's another challenge altogether, right? Two big banks have to get over the competition angle and then decide to collaborate. For startups, you have to deal with the incumbents. You have to not only convince the bigger financial institutions of your credentials, but also then move them into a collaborative model. So I think, and Ravi and Tarusha, I think both of you are working on aspects, on specific use cases leveraging blockchain technology, which do require a lot of collaboration. So let me ask you, how does this play out in Tarusha's case on asset-backed banking, and Ravi for decentralized identity? Maybe we can start with Tarusha. Tarusha, I think your video is not on, so I don't know.
No, it does say it's on, but wait,
Okay.
I'll just stop
No
it
worries.
and start again.
No worries.
Okay. Yeah, so basically, regarding collaboration, I think with startups, you kind of hit the nail on the head that startups have all of these other check boxes to first kind of meet that criteria and at least reach that level where we can collaborate with the big boys. So, just in terms of what I do, that, we kind of we are creating an inclusive fintech platform where there are multiple asset classes and users can invest in these asset classes, and then we offer financial services on top of these investments, basically making them very, very liquid. So we have a deal in place for an asset backed card with MasterCard, so users can actually use their investment in real time, essentially. So what, to your point regarding collaboration and how blockchain kind of plays a part in it. So we are doing all of this on blockchain to improve the security and transparency aspect, obviously, and to sort of make sure that what Hitesh said, that you have to basically convince people that it's not just crypto. Like when you're talking about blockchain frameworks and you're talking about DLT in any way, people kind of associate that with crypto very quickly, and because there is a lack of clear policy around crypto in India, especially, that kind of makes people hesitant, right? And especially with the banking services revocation order that had come in place, which has now been struck down by the Supreme Court. But when that overnight order had come in, and all of these crypto-centric businesses had to actually shut down or move out, so that kind of also makes banks very wary. So for the longest time, we had to actually, we had several meetings with our banks to facilitate this card partnership, to convince them that okay, this is like real gold and real silver that is being kept in vaults. It's 100% insured. We have a tri-party agreement usually with a custodian, with an insurer, and with us, to make sure that the end user is completely protected. So essentially, yes, it was a process of a lot of back and forth where we had to explain to them, because again, it's not a fault. It's not like you can blame them, because this technology is so much in its infancy, right? There is something new happening every day. I'm in the middle of it, and every day I get up and I have to learn five new things. So I understand their hesitation that there is lack of policy, and they don't really understand the technology that well. But then that kind of puts an extra onus on me to make sure that I am kind of disseminating the right information regarding blockchain, because blockchain is like the internet, like 20 years ago, basically, that it will come and it will revolutionize all these other verticals. It's not just the financial vertical. It's going to revolutionize logistics, supply chains, and whatnot, insurance, and everything. So it is just about kind of making sure that all the stakeholders are on the same page regarding the kind of benefits one can reap by putting all of these services, etc., on blockchain. So yeah, essentially it was a bit of an uphill battle, but with open-minded stakeholders, we've been able to do it. And as I said, that it has to be understand where you are going with this, and they actually see the value that you're adding.
Mr. Vivek, you're on mute.
Apologies. So I think, Tarusha, that was a very, very interesting insight on being able to understand or being able to explain the technology to stakeholders, which brings me to Ravi. Decentralized identity, a very difficult concept to understand, only works in a network only when people collaborate with each other. So what has been your experience? Can you walk us through your journey?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you made a point there, Vivek. So I would like to bifurcate this particular question into two segments. One is collaboration on the technology front, second, collaboration on the business front. So when I'm saying collaboration on the technology front, what I mean is developing standards, governance model, contribution to open source, so that it becomes more acceptable to the participants. And from the business side, something that we are developing as a solution and which is making a difference to the business, but how we can bring a network effect to the solution. Something like Facebook, as an example. If we have the participants coming together, then there is a network effect to grow the particular solution. So starting with technology side of it. So especially now that we have heard about the different use cases, I will focus only on decentralized identity. So we have seen that there are groups that have been coming together, be it in the form of foundations, working groups, or consortia, where we are talking about standardizing the solutions or the technology components. And these groups are being formed by large corporation, government, startups, and academias as well. So such kind of collaboration is very, very important to foster the adoption of technology. Because if we are developing a particular proprietary solution, that may not be acceptable at a large scale. And that is where I feel that from a startup perspective, it is also important that we contribute to the open source community, and at the same time, we consume the open source component, because the adoption would be faster. And that is one of the way to collaborate. On the business side, what we are trying to do differently is, we are, instead of talking about a big bang use case, which certainly required multiple parties to come together, we are taking a piecemeal approach where we are trying to do the same solution, but compartmentalizing it as an internal use case for an organization. So for example, if we talk about decentralized identity, for a nation, it would take multiple people to come together, multiple parties to come together, including governments and others. But what we are trying to demonstrate is going with one institutions where they have multiple branches or they have sister companies, and then demonstrating how effectively it can be utilized so that the benefits can be realized, and then extrapolating it to to their vendors, to their partners, so that that solution automatically reaches to a stage where the benefits are known, and now we can get in the network effect. I think with most of the identity related solution, what we are looking at is a top-down approach, especially from the government side, where they give some kind of a framework or guidelines for adoption of this kind of an identity solution. And to our surprise, the blockchain strategy paper that came out from a couple of state government as well as from Indian government, I think they are looking at identity as one of the prominent use case. So that gives some assurance that government is coming to the table, talking to the industry in terms of collaboration. At the same time, academias are also one of the important partners into the ecosystem, where they are trying to bridge a gap in terms of the talent that is required for the industry. So I think that kind of a collaboration is also very important from startup perspective, where we wanted to have young blood coming into the industry and picking up this technology.
Sure. I think I took away one very important strategy tactic from what you mentioned, which is around start by proving it in one ecosystem, right? It also resonates with what Hitesh and Joshua have experienced in their day-to-day work, which is, if I can prove it inside my bank, or if I can prove it inside one organization, then use that to expand and land and expand kind of a thing into the overall ecosystem. So I think excellent insights there. I see a couple of questions come in from the audience, and I wanted to pick one particular one up because I think it's got relevance to most of us on the panel here. In fact, 3 questions almost touching on the same trend. So it says, how can we harness a blockchain to fight fraud, financial fraud, and scams in today's cyberspace? So of course, it's a rather big question, but I think let's focus on 2 things. If Hitesh and Joshua, you could focus on how blockchain can be leveraged to fight, let's say, trade-based money laundering and other similar trade-based fraud. And Ravi, specifically, if you can talk about identity fraud, how do we look at blockchain to overcome those?
Sure.
Yeah, Josh,
yeah,
please.
Yeah, Joshua, go ahead.
All right, thank you. So I think it's a really interesting point, right? If you look at trade-based fraud, right, and I'd be curious for Hitesh to get his view on the India market as well, but a lot of it is you have one asset, right, whether it's a ship full of goods or a container, and somebody is going to make multiple copies of the documents that portray the ownership of that asset, right? And with paper, of course, copies and things like that, that's relatively easy to do. And when you're using a digital system, especially one where you can have a unique asset, such as in a blockchain network, it can really reduce that, right? So you don't have this double spend issue. You don't have this issue of somebody who owns one shipment of goods getting finance from 4 different parties because you can only get finance from that digital asset once. So I think that'll be quite interesting. But outside of digital assets and that type of fraud, it's just simply getting better data from the source rather than relying on it going through multiple intermediaries and multiple sort of printing processes, and then having to trust paper, which is the best thing that's available. If you don't have common infrastructure, the lowest common or the highest common denominator of communication is, signed and stamped paper, which we know is not fraud proof. So just having that infrastructure in place, I think, is going to do wonders. But Hitesh, I'll be curious for your view too.
I think the other important aspect, is most of the messaging systems today which exist, they don't connect to your core banking, right? I mean, they are and they interact with the so what happens is that today, if you are able to get the framework, which is also in a way touches your core banking, I think the real-time updation of customers we can very easily. And in past, we had a classic example of whatever trade happened, through the messaging system was not recorded on core banking. So that is one. Second is, I will elaborate what you, Joseph, mentioned. There are where many times you can get in. It comes to from the security standpoint of view in using DLT framework, and specifically for the trade.
Sure. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Ravi, from the identity side, what do you think?
Sure. So I think, identity frauds can be categorized into multiple departments or multiple segments, rather, I would say. So let me pick up the simple ones, which we can easily correlate. So starting with the data breaches, right? So when we're talking about data breaches, primarily because there is a centralized system which holds millions of records, a hacker gets into it, and then the millions of records get compromised, and we have ever growing list of such data breach that are happening, right from the Facebook Analytica to Marriott Hotel to Home Depot and whatnot. Decentralizing the storage of data so that there is no single honeypot. I think that is a very crucial aspect that we are able to solve, so that the hacker will not have an incentive to strike one honeypot and get millions of records, right? So decentralizing storage of identity to an individual, and that is where the term sovereign data and sovereign identity comes in place. The second one I can quickly pick up is the password related frauds, right? So most of the time, I think many of us, as per a study, indicates that we end up having at least 120 accounts. So we don't really maintain 120 passwords. And what we end up doing is repeating our passwords. And that becomes, again, a simple way for a hacker to understand what is the common password used for one email ID that we typically use, and then crack into our different accounts and again, make those account compromised. So again, some simple technology solution that we are building and that can be leveraged, let's say, passwordless authentication, right? So instead of giving control to a password, we can have some mechanism into a user device, and that can be leveraged in order to log in and make even the user experience better on that side. Third thing that I would like to mention is about the oversharing of data, right? So again, data related frauds in terms of impersonating someone, right? So if I'm giving my copies of Aadhaar, or let's say my national identity that contains many more attributes than maybe one data point, let's say my age that is required. Now, if I'm sharing those 7 to 10 extra data points, there is a high chance that somebody is impersonating me when maybe making a call to a bank and maybe changing few of the details of mine, right? So I think those kind of impersonating things can be also reduced with something like zero knowledge proof, again, that is being leveraged in the self-sovereign identity side, where we talk about data selective disclosure. So sharing only a piece of information that is required for that particular request, so that we are not oversharing and reduce possible theft of identity or frauds related to identity.
Sure. So That zero knowledge proof is an excellent example of how we can limit this data transmissions. And of course, later in the day, Richard Gendel Brown, the CTO of R3, would also be talking about it from another aspect, which is confidential computing, which is looking at reducing this data from a hardware standpoint, right, rather than rely on software proof. So yes, and all of these technologies can be integrated into blockchain. So we have got about 4 minutes to go. I think I just wanted to give everyone 30 seconds, starting with Tarusha, by talking about kind of the elephant in the room, which still hasn't left us, which is COVID. Right? COVID has impacted different industries in different ways. It has almost killed some industries, put them into coma. It has ensured explosive growth for certain digital industries. So what have you seen in terms of your industry, and especially in terms of blockchain adoption because of COVID? Let's start with Tarusha. Probably everyone about 30 seconds to answer this.
Sure. So, initially when this entire COVID business started and, there was a lockdown, we were very confused. We had to shut down our offices and we felt like we were not working properly as a team. But now I'm glad to say that, COVID has been, in a way, in a very morbid way, it's been a blessing in disguise. Now we can actually hire very remote talent, right? We don't really have to worry about them being geographically located here. And in blockchain, that's very, very important because, as I said, this is a technology in its infancy. There are very few skilled people and skilled developers, so to say. So, it's very easy for us to hire from different parts of the world. Now we have that smooth running machine where, we are having remote meetings and it's a very, very diverse team. So that's all good. But initially, obviously it was quite a setback because we were all fumbling. We did not really know how to sort of streamline our meetings and just sort of coordinate with the team. That communication became a huge problem, right? In the office, people can just go across to your your particular block and you can talk to them, and that was becoming a problem. Obviously, the other thing that we've seen as a team is mental health challenges. We've seen a lot of our team members kind of struggling because they have to stay at home all the time, and this, at least now, it's gotten better because lockdowns have gotten lifted, so at least they can step out of their houses. But initially, when it was put down, that was another concern. As for the blockchain space in general, I think because of COVID and the lockdowns that were put in place, it's become a even smaller industry. It's easier to reach out to people, and people are more responsive. So I don't have any bad things to say there. Obviously, it's been a very tough time, but I think we've kind of adopted to it, and we are doing well now.
Great. Thanks, Tarusha. Maybe Hitesh, just a couple of words on it. Has adoption increased, decreased? What's been the impact?
Yeah, I think I would say that it has only accelerated the digital adoption more and more. And I think we all have learned now new ways of doing business, right? Learning in terms of how do you cope up with this kind of situations and ensure that business continues, right, despite this kind of events. So I think big learning. It has only accelerated the way people adopt or the behavior change in terms of adoption of digital and technology. So all positive, I think.
Great, good to hear. Josh and Ravi, final words.
Yeah, no, I think, besides a lot of the downsides, of course, of the pandemic, the accelerant that we found is that the business case has widened. It's not just about efficiencies or growth, it's about business continuity. So if you don't have people in offices to receive paper or to send paper or to deal with things like that, international trade could stop.
Yep.
And that's no longer an acceptable outcome. And digitization through platforms like Contours and others is really the only way forward. So I think it's definitely become a higher agenda item. And again, it's just sort of widened that case to include business continuity, which I think everyone needs to think about these days.
Yeah, and I think from my side, many of the things that we were not used to doing online, I think we started doing those things online. And digital identity is addressable to 100% of the online market. So we have seen certainly a very, very good spike. and we are one of the beneficiary in terms of where this market is heading and people moving online, and that requires more robust identity framework. So I think we are one of the beneficiary of COVID, I would say.
Great. So glad to see that this challenging time is throwing up some positives. Thanks to all our panelists. It was, I think, a very, very illuminating and interesting discussion. I think the message is clear. Collaboration is the way to go. There are challenges, but they can be worked through. And the panel here is living proof that once you have worked through those challenges, then there is a big reward at the end of it. So thank you to all our panelists, and thank you to IAMAI for organizing this panel. Over to you, Yatin.
Thank you for
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone, for making these discussions super exciting and enlightening. I would also like to thank to our platinum partner R3 and our knowledge partner EY. Do stay tuned for such more exciting conversations. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.